So I want you to imagine handing someone the keys to a multi-million-dollar Formula One race car. Like the engine is purring, the tires are hot, all that real-time telemetry is just streaming across the dashboard.
Oh man, I'd be terrified.
Right. But here's the catch. The driver has literally only ever ridden a bicycle.
Oh, yeah, it's not going to end well.
No, it's going to be a disaster. I mean, they might figure out how to turn the steering wheel or, poke at the digital display, but the second you put them on an actual track, they're going to crash hard. And that is exactly the reality we are facing right now when we talk about artificial intelligence in the modern workforce.
It really is. It's a massive structural crisis, honestly, because, for the past few years, we've just been entirely focused on the novelty of the machine itself.
The chatbots, the image generators, all that stuff.
Exactly. The generative text, the instant coding. But in doing all of that, we've basically neglected the human being who is actually sitting in the driver's seat.
Which is exactly our mission for this deep dive today. We are exploring a really profound question for you all. How do we actually prepare human beings for the AI age? Because surviving this era, it isn't about panicking over AI stealing your job. It's about treating AI as a necessary software upgrade for humans.
A software upgrade for humans. I love that framing.
Yeah, and to understand how we actually survive this and get that upgrade, we're looking at two main sources today. First, we have a legislative and technical blueprint, the GOEWS Structured AI Apprenticeship Measurement, which is anchored to Georgia's House Bill 1302 and Act 474. And we're pairing that with excerpts from a really fascinating book called The New Business Paradigm, AI, Leadership, and Digital Labor.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, I think we have to start with the stakes, right? Because the new business paradigm makes this incredibly compelling argument that we aren't just looking at like a new tech tool to write our emails faster. We were looking at a full-blown civilizational shift.
Let's unpack that a bit, because history does give us a pretty clear pattern for this kind of thing, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. If you look back, every major epoch in human history is defined by its core raw material. So in the agricultural age, the raw material was land. Wealth was just, your capacity to cultivate and defend physical territory.
Right, and then that shifted dramatically during the industrial age, where it wasn't just about land anymore. The raw material became iron, coal, mechanical energy. It became about who could manufacture physical goods at scale.
Exactly. And then jumping to our very recent history, we enter the information age. The raw material became data. The ultimate competitive advantage was your capacity to capture, transmit, and analyze information. And here's the really wild part. We are now crossing the threshold into the AI age, and the raw material of the AI age is no longer data.
Because the machine already has all of the data, right?
Yes, the machine has the data. So the new raw material, according to the sources, is structured human performance.
Structured human performance. Wow. So we're talking about the measurable, longitudinally tracked record of how a human being actually performs, how they grow, and how they execute complex decisions alongside a synthetic intelligence.
Preface.
It really is like a series of software upgrades for humanity. I mean, in the past, we upgraded our physical tools, right? We went from wooden plows to steam-powered factories to massive server farms. But this AI age is fundamentally different because it requires an upgrade to our cognitive operating system.
And that's why it feels so uncomfortable for so many people. Because this shift, it isn't just economic, it's almost metaphysical.
Metaphysical? How so?
Well, it challenges human identity at its core. I mean,
Yeah.
for centuries, the professional class has believed that human cognitive output, our judgment, our analysis, our creativity, was uniquely irreplaceable.
Right.
And now you sit down at your laptop and a machine simulates that output in seconds. It causes a really profound psychological disorientation.
Okay, so let's ground this in reality for a second. Because if you walk onto a college campus right now, or you look at a junior corporate team, students and recent grads, they're already using AI, right? I mean, they know how to open the tools, they experiment with the prompts, they can generate a 5-page essay in 30 seconds.
Right, they can.
So my question is, why isn't that enough? Haven't they already adapted to the tool? What does this all actually mean for their readiness?
So that is the exact illusion we are currently trapped in. Because generating a quick answer in a chat window is completely different from translating AI into a day-to-day complex professional workflow.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, the data shows that more than half of employers say their absolute biggest challenge right now is finding graduates with practical, ethical AI skills. It's a huge gap. Only a tiny fraction of graduates actually feel highly proficient at applying AI to solve real employer problems.
When you break it down like that, I get it. Because, asking a chatbot to write a polite email to a client, that's easy. But asking it to analyze a fragmented supply chain, spot the inefficiencies, and draft a restructuring plan while keeping company data secure, that's a completely different universe of skill.
Exactly. You have to know what questions to ask, and honestly, how to verify if the machine is just straight up hallucinating or lying to you.
Right.
And right now, our workforce readiness pipeline is failing at this. The legislative blueprint we're looking at today, the GOEWS document, it outlines what it calls the cognitive fraud gap.
The cognitive fraud gap.
Yeah, because historically, education and corporate training have relied almost entirely on lagging indicators to prove that someone actually learned a skill.
Okay, I want you listening to think about your own corporate training or college experience for a second. How was your learning actually measured? Like, if you're like most of us, you probably sat through a video module, you clicked the next button a bunch of times, maybe you took a multiple choice quiz at the end, and boom, you got a digital badge.
A certificate of completion.
Right. But were they measuring your actual capability? Or were they just rewarding you for clicking through the screens?
The sources refer to this as engagement theater. We measure screen time, clicks, and just basic survival of the course rather than actual verifiable mastery.
Mm.
And the systemic danger of doing this is just massive. The GOEWS document points to a pretty stark historical precedent for the Sweet v. Cardona settlement.
Oh, wow. Yes, that's the case where the federal government had to issue, what was it, a $5.8 billion loan discharge for over 500,000 students.
Yep, 5.8 billion. And the core issue there was that these legacy proprietary networks scaled what the document calls attendance masquerading as capability.
Ouch. Attendance masquerading as capability. That's a brutal way to put it, but it's so true.
Well, it is. Because there was no instrument to measure real-time learning honestly, the whole asset class eventually just collapsed. When employers hire graduates today who have only been measured by those lagging indicators, they face an unmediated cognitive tax at the point of hire.
Meaning, the graduate simply cannot execute the job they were theoretically credentialed to do.
Exactly.
Okay, let's unpack this because this brings up a very real concern. If you're listening to this and thinking, great, so now my boss is going to use AI to track how fast my brain works and fire me if my numbers dip, that is exactly what we need to look at next because governments are realizing this is a problem. The state of Georgia, for instance, decided to stop politely asking for better training and actually started legislating a solution.
Yes, Georgia's Education and Workforce Strategy Act.
Right, House Bill 1302 or Act 474.
And what is vital to understand about this mandate is how it completely dismantles the old way of doing things. The law essentially strips away an institution's ability to self-report its own success metrics.
Wow.
Yeah, it forces public and private leaders to prove the actual financial return on investment of their talent pipelines. And they do this by cross-matching student identifiers against real-time Department of Labor wage and tax records.
Okay, but wait. As the GOEWS document notes, aren't tax records also lagging indicators? I mean, you only find out a program failed years after this person has already left and failed in the workforce.
Exactly. Finding out someone can't do their job 2 years after you hired them is way too late. You need to know while they're learning. And that brings us to the technological solution presented in the GOEWS blueprint. They introduce an AI cognitive architecture called Area Teach.
Area Teach. And this is the instrument for mass adoption we were talking about.
Right. It shifts the entire paradigm from lagging outcome management to real-time process governance. And it does this using a completely new telemetry metric called learning gain per hour, or LGH.
So LGH isn't tracking if you finish the module or click next. It's actually measuring the exact velocity of your capability acceleration.
Yes.
Like it takes your verified skill mastery score at the end of a session, subtracts your baseline score from the beginning, and divides it by the hours you spent.
That's the exact formula. It is treating human development like an engineered, measurable asset. And the way it achieves this is rooted in some pretty classic cognitive science. The system maps directly onto vocational curriculums using what's known as ADD backwards design.
I love backwards design. Let's clarify that for a second for anyone who hasn't encountered it. ADD backwards design basically means instead of starting with chapter 1 of a textbook and just moving forward blindly, You start at the finish line.
Right? You start with the goal.
You define the exact real-world task the employee needs to execute on the job, and you build the entire training backward from that highly specific outcome.
That's spot on. So whether you are training, say, a business development representative to generate sales pipelines, or you're training an apprentice electrician to diagnose a circuit failure, the system anchors the learning to that specific occupational task.
But wait, let me play devil's advocate here. How do we know the system isn't just passing them along based on simple pattern recognition? I mean, if an apprentice electrician just memorizes that the answer to question 4 is always C without actually understanding the electrical circuit, how do we know they're actually learning the skill?
That is the exact engineering challenge ARA is built to solve. And it does it using something called the Rule 7 Mastery Verification Gate.
Rule 7 Mastery Verification Gate. Sounds intense.
It's an automated mechanism that prevents the engine from ever advancing a user to a higher cognitive level unless they can successfully complete an alternative, non-repetitive task structure.
Alternative and non-repetitive. So how does it generate that on the fly?
Well, if the learner correctly diagnoses a circuit failure in one scenario, Rule 7 mandates that the AI instantly generates a novel, structurally identical but contextually distinct problem. So the variables change, the environment changes. You literally cannot game the test because the test is never the same twice.
That is incredible.
And it does this while actively managing the learner's psychology too. It utilizes Bloom's revised taxonomy and Sweller's cognitive load theory.
Okay, let's unpack those two because they are so crucial to how the human brain actually operates in reality. Bloom's taxonomy is basically the ladder of learning, right? Moving from just remembering basic facts to understanding them to applying them, all the way up to synthesizing new, complex ideas.
Exactly.
And then Sweller's cognitive load theory postulates that our human working memory can only process so much new information at once before it just gets completely overwhelmed and shuts down.
Precisely. So imagine a learner navigating this system. Say they're working on a complex supply chain analysis prompt, and they miss a critical variable. The system detects this as a partial recall signal. Now, under the old engagement theater model, they just get a big red error or a failing grade.
Which usually induces a minor panic attack and makes people want to just slam their laptop shut.
Right, it spikes their cognitive load. But ARIA preserves the operation state to prevent that overload. It issues a supportive, normalizing statement to reduce their anxiety, and then it dynamically downregulates the difficulty.
Oh, it downregulates it automatically.
Yeah, it drops down a tier on Bloom's taxonomy.
Right.
So maybe it goes from synthesizing all the supply chain data down to just applying a single formula. It stabilizes that foundational concept before moving them back up. It keeps the learner in their zone of proximal development, that sweet spot where the work is challenging but still achievable.
That is wild. It's literally like having a world-class, infinitely patient tutor sitting over your shoulder, adjusting the lesson in real time, and it completely strips away the social anxiety of looking dumb in front of a classroom.
Exactly.
But, getting the individual up to speed in a vacuum is really only half the battle, because if we take this newly upgraded human and just drop them back into a messy, completely unstructured corporate environment, the whole thing falls apart anyway, right?
100%. Which is why the new business paradigm really emphasizes the critical need for shared design and clear norms inside the organization. Giving an employee access to an infinite AI library without giving them what the book calls the foundation literacy stack is completely useless.
It's like dropping someone into a massive library without a catalog. Or, honestly, dropping them in without the ability to read in the first place. We expect these graduates to navigate this ocean of information, but they don't have the cognitive infrastructure to evaluate what the AI is actually handing them.
No, they don't.
Career readiness now absolutely depends on this shared design. We need courses, simulations, early career experiences that actually mirror how work is changing. You need repeated chances to apply these tools in a real context, explain why you made a choice, show where your human judgment influenced the outcome, and maybe most importantly, learn when not to rely on the technology at all.
And the problem is right now, the expectations around AI use in the workplace are incredibly blurry. I mean, students are forced to just guess what is acceptable. Faculty members are terrified about academic integrity. Managers are paralyzed by workplace risk. And without explicit practice standards, people just default to their own, often flawed, judgment.
Right.
But when those standards are explicit and reinforced, trust actually has a chance to grow.
The book actually outlines two distinct paths that organizations are taking with this right now. The first one is called the displacement fork.
Yes. The displacement fork is basically the path of accidental slow-motion catastrophe.
Yeah.
This is where an organization uses AI to simply take over bulk analysis and judgment. The human worker becomes nothing more than a validator of machine output.
Their identity just collapses into being a mere sign-off layer for a machine-run process.
Exactly.
Which is terrifying for the company because nobody is actually thinking critically anymore. The machine is out there driving the car, and the human is just sitting in the passenger seat watching the speedometer.
Yeah, that's a recipe for disaster. But the second path is the enhancement fork. And in this path, AI removes the low-level repetitive cognitive load. The human role evolves. The employee becomes the system architect, the ethics designer, the cultural risk assessor. They govern the machine's capability to protect the organization.
But to get onto that enhancement fork, you need someone actively driving the strategy, right? You can't just buy a ChatGPT enterprise license and hope for the best. The sources argue you need a formalized role for this, like a professional development architect or a chief learning officer.
You do. You essentially need a chief learning officer acting like a control rod in a nuclear reactor.
I love that analogy.
Yeah, they're modulating the raw power of the AI so it generates energy without causing a total meltdown. The chief learning officer is responsible for building what a book calls an internal trust architecture. Because if you want the outside world to trust your AI, your internal operations have to trust it first.
It makes total sense.
And part of building that trust comes from establishing a red line decision framework.
This is such a crucial concept. Red line decisions are the calls that must always, under every circumstance, be owned by a human being, regardless of how smart the AI gets.
Right. So let's look at a concrete corporate scenario here. Imagine an AI system is analyzing workforce efficiency, and it flags an employee who is drastically underperforming.
Okay.
The AI can write the performance improvement plan, it can pull all the productivity data, it can even draft the legal termination paperwork. But the red line framework dictates that the AI cannot initiate the actual termination. Only a human manager can make that final call.
Because only a human understands the relational nuances. Right. The empathy required, the ethical context of that specific moment in someone's life.
Exactly. And by drawing those red lines explicitly, you protect human agency. You communicate to your workforce that AI is an extension of their judgment, not a replacement for their moral responsibility.
And having that shared expectation of transparency and human review, that helps graduates carry better habits from the classroom directly into the workplace. It builds real trust.
It does. But, the implementation of all this raises a massive practical hurdle for most companies.
Here's where it gets really interesting, the cost. Because everything we've just talked about, real-time telemetry, personalized AI tutoring that dynamically downregulates on Bloom's taxonomy, hiring chief learning officers, that sounds astronomically expensive. If you are a small or medium-sized business listening to this, you're probably thinking, I cannot afford to build a custom cognitive operating system for my apprentices.
And that is exactly where the genius of the GOEWS prototype and the TPEC-3 cohesive ROI model comes into play.
The TPEC-3 model?
Yeah, they have engineered a financial architecture that makes this massive software upgrade not just viable, but incredibly lucrative for businesses right now.
So let's look at the actual numbers, because this is where the theoretical stuff turns into actionable business strategy.
Okay, so the GOEWS document outlines a system designed to sit safely under existing federal funding caps, specifically the Federal Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, or WIOA. The WIOA provides an individual training account ceiling of up to $7,000 per participant.
Okay, so there is up to $7,000 in federal funding available per learner.
Right. Now, the Area Peach individual seat license, this incredibly advanced real-time telemetry training platform, we've been geeking out about it, is priced at a flat $3,275.
Okay, $3,275, which leaves a gap of $3,725 from that federal cap.
Exactly. And under the GOEWS pre-qualified anchor employer framework, when a corporate partner hires a state apprentice using that WIOA voucher to fund the training, that remaining $3,725 doesn't just disappear into the ether.
Where does it go?
It is returned directly to the employer as a subsidized onboarding wage offset.
Wait, I want to challenge this because it almost sounds too good to be true. The government is essentially handing a corporate employer almost $4,000 to train their own employee. There has to be a rigorous auditing catch there, right?
The catch is the data. Historically, human development and onboarding have been viewed by the C-suite as a sunk cost, right? It's just a black hole where money goes in and maybe eventually productivity comes out months later.
If you're lucky.
Exactly. But because of the LGH metric that learning gain per hour, The employer isn't guessing if the new hire is ready anymore. They have a mathematically verified ledger showing that the human capability has been successfully transferred.
Ah, so they can prove to the auditors beyond a shadow of a doubt that the learning actually took place before the downstream economic risk of a bad hire is ever realized.
Yes. So the math essentially turns onboarding from a resented cost center into a federally subsidized asset. It aligns the incentives perfectly.
Wow. The state gets verified, capable taxpayers. The employee gets a premium, stress-free learning environment that actually respects their cognitive limits. And the employer gets a highly trained AI fluent worker without bearing the crushing cost of traditional onboarding. It essentially creates a net zero talent acquisition mechanism.
It's the ultimate instrumentation of human performance. But it requires organizations to step up and establish those shared designs, clear norms, and red line frameworks we discussed.
So let's pull all of this together for you listening. We started today with a Formula One car and a bicycle driver. The AI age is here, and it is demanding a massive fundamental software upgrade for humanity.
Yeah.
We have to move past the novelty of just prompting a chatbot to write a poem.
We really do.
We have to move past engagement theater, the total cognitive fraud of just clicking next on a training video. Because career readiness now depends entirely on whether recent grads are prepared to use AI in practical, ethical ways that mirror the complex situations they'll actually face on the job.
And that means making a deliberate choice. As a leader and as an employee, you have to choose to step onto the enhancement fork where AI strips away the mundane so you can govern the complex.
And as we adapt to this new paradigm, it's critical to realize that the way we value human contribution is permanently altering. Which brings up one final overarching question for you to consider today. If you are currently riding a bicycle, it is time to learn how to drive the race car because the keys are already in your hand. Look at your own day-to-day workflow. Ask yourself, am I just functioning as a sign-off layer for a machine? Or am I actively compounding my own irreplaceable human capability?
And here's something else to think about as you navigate this shift. If our cognitive growth is now going to be perfectly measured, tracked, and scored by AI hour by hour through metrics like LGH, who ultimately owns that data?
Oh, that's a great question.
Right. When you leave a company, does your cognitive ledger go with you as proof of your capability? Or does your employer own the exact mathematical map of how your brain learns?
That is a fascinating and honestly slightly unsettling thought to leave on. As the infrastructure of our minds becomes the most valuable raw material in the new economy, defining who holds the deed to that material is going to be the next great frontier.